that you need to know about, and then we're going to talk about deceit this week. Notably, this weekend, guys, 2 days from now is Swordfish. That's right, right? Swordfish, you know what Swordfish is, right, Seiji? Right. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with Swordfish, Swordfish is kind of the unofficial World US kind of HEMA championship. This will be Swordfish number 12 going on. It's been happening for the last 12 years, obviously. Not an official world event, but it gets really the top fencers from around the United States, around Europe, around the world traveling to it. I know that the contingent that is planning to compete from the US is already there. A bunch of them were getting tours of Gothenburg from Roger Norling this week. And then, you know, everybody's starting to arrive. So if you're interested in watching the Swordfish live stream, which you absolutely should. I mean, you're watching this live stream or you're watching it as a video later, go to the link that's down in the description. It starts on Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific, so like 3 p.m. Eastern. Figure out for your local time frame where you're going to be at and go from there. But otherwise, this week, guys, we're talking about deception, right? We just went through Halloween. It's a time for costumes and you know, getting into lots of trouble. So like Seiji, I know you were going to a bunch of parties for Halloween, being a college student. Did you get a good costume going on? Anything fun?
I just wore my bathrobe and pretended to be a monk.
Wore your bathrobe and pretended to be a monk. Nice, nice. Okay, so if that's, you know, what you really, the bathrobe and a monk.
Yeah,
a little disappointed.
I know, sad.
But anyway, it got us thinking. It got us talking about deceptions and the use of deceptions in fencing. Now, deceitful actions are not the kind of thing that you're going to use all the time. But when used appropriately, they are really, really effective. And we had planned to kind of go through and talk about a variety of the different actions this week and kind of get into, you know, kind of a broad spectrum. But then, as always happens, a new interpretation of a particular technique came to light. And so we're going to start with Zukin, right? So Zukin is the one that we're talking about. And so there's kind of a question here on Zukin. If you read the English translation of Meyer, Föhring translates it as pulling, right? Like that's what he translated it as. Yes. But the German term Zukin means to twitch. It means to jerk. And so I was actually having a lot of difficulty with this week, to the point where like I broke out my German-English dictionary, and I was looking through Meyer, and I was looking through the untranslated versions of Meyer, and looking at some of the historical stuff. And it kind of makes a big difference, right? Like I'm really curious, and maybe any of the native German speakers that know their early modern German want to give us an idea of why you might translate Zukin as pulling. If you want to chime in the comments and let us know, I'd appreciate it. But it's an important question, because there really is a difference between what I think of as someone. If I tell you to pull, what are you going to do?
An action that pulls it back.
Okay, and if I tell you to twitch or jerk the sword, what are you going to do then?
It's kind of a
right. It's going to be quite a different set of actions, and so this kind of gets into things very carefully. So that's really a question, right? What is the proper term? So we're going to talk about Zukin today, is really what it's going to be. And this is going to be kind of a rambling conversation as we work through some ideas, as we re-look at our interpretation and go from there. So to start, we're going to play a little video. The video is from Thomas Carrillo of the Fresno Freifechter. It was his fault that I kind of started down this rabbit hole of re-examining Zukin and kind of doing a survey of the different techniques that are out there. So let's go ahead and play Thomas's video right now.
Okay. All right, so the way we used to do pulling was we would cut, and then we'd have to slam on the brakes here, and then we'd have to pull it all the way back and come around like this. So it's either really, really big and slow, like that, or we would have to just resort to kind of a wrist cut to do this. I don't think this is very good, right? So the new way that I'm doing pulling is I'll cut and I'll pull it back. So instead of pulling the blade backwards like this, what I'm doing is I'm pulling the hilt back like this. And that allows me to very quickly cut upwards with a big cut. right? So let's use the third deusac drill as an example first. So I'll come in and I'll cut straight vertically, I'll pull it back and I'll cut in very quickly like this. So the pulling once again is I'm pulling with the hilt back towards myself and then I'm cutting up like this. So one more time. That's what I think the pulling is. One more example with the longsword. Let's do the example of pulling with the longsword. So we cut in. What we used to do would be to pull back along its course like this, and if he decides to parry this way, we would cut in like this or something awkward. Now what we're doing, we're cutting in, we're pulling this way just like we did with the deusac. Now if he doesn't move, of course we're just going to come in and cut like this. But if he does move, pull, and now I'm set up right away to cut in with that short edge, just like the play wants. So one more time. I cut in, I pull, and then I can cut in like this, or I cut in, I pull, and then I can just drop it right on his head like that. I think this also has an implication for the four-cut drill, the Meyer square, right? So before, when we did the Meyer square, let's do it properly. So out here, then I'll run off, I'll cut, this is normal. What we used to do is just kind of pull it back and cut, and then pull it back and cut, pull it back and cut. Now I'm starting to think this is not quite correct. So now what I'm going to do is, let's do it properly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull and cut right away, then pull and cut right away. Now I can pull it over my head like that. So one more time, let's get a better angle so he can see. So one more time. Cut, and then pull and cut. Now pull and cut. Now pull around and cut like that. Okay. Another thing that this, I don't have a rapier, so this is my second rapier. Another thing that this pulling solved is, let's use the Scheitelhau as an example. Right, so the scalp cut calls for you to cut downwards, and when he parries, he says for you to pull upwards. Now if I pull up like this is really hard, and I feel like I'm going to get tendonitis if I keep practicing like this, right? This is hard and this is slow to do. But if I just pull like this, I can cut straight down again. Like that. So I think that this is the new pulling. All right, thanks.
Okay. All right, so Thomas's interpretation there got us thinking. We had been doing an interpretation that's very similar to the one from Sword Carolina. If you're not familiar with it, it's probably what a lot of people think of when they do Zukin, which is going to be, and we'll just do this simply here, we'll move to the other camera later, of a really simple action, right? We strike in, he parries a bit wide, we pull back just like Thomas described, and strike around or otherwise come back in, right? And so that's the one that Sword Carolina has on their video channel. And I think it's probably the kind of standard interpretation that we've pulled in, or we've struck in, and we've pulled back. But like I said, I busted out my, here's my old copy of my Webster's German-English dictionary, and I was looking through, and I started looking at Zukin, and as one of our, George, in comments there said, you know, in Swedish it's closer to a jerk or a twitch, and so it got me thinking and got me looking at this. We looked at some other videos and some other interpretations. One of the more interesting ones came from, who was it? It was I'm going to mispronounce their name, and I apologize. The Draenestag guys? You know which ones I'm talking about? Those guys, yeah. I knew I was going to mispronounce their name. They have a very interesting interpretation that when striking in, or Seiji has struck at me and I parry, and I go for a thrust, and he pulls back to parry that with his face, I'm actually going to do something very similar to Thomas and pull back to then come around. That was their interpretation of what Zukin was. And so really this has led down this giant rabbit hole. And this comes back to the question of deceptions, right? So that question being, are we trying to give a different answer to the same question every time when we do a deception, right? Often, the setup for the Zukin is that the person has parried well off to their side, that they aren't supplying any kind of threat, and so we're going to pull back and we're going to strike around, or we're going to threaten to strike around if we're using it in a deceitful fashion. But that's also the same situation that we're basically given when we use failing and the Ablaufen to strike around, right? We're not being threatened. The person is striking at our sword. So is that the setup we want? Or are we looking for a different setup in this scenario? Is it something that we can use if a person is fighting a little bit more conservatively? And so we can use it potentially to deceive in that situation. Seiji's going to show you his interpretation here in just a moment of using it against somebody that's perhaps not giving up the center quite as easily. And you know, that's kind of the question, right, that we have on a lot of these is why? Why are we doing them? Are we Zukining for the... I don't think that's a word. It is now.
Zukining?
Are we Zukining? I am terrible, right? Like English.
Are twitching.
Yes, are we twitching? Are we jerking? Are we pulling? Zukining. I'm going to anglicize it. For the same reasons that we're going to use Ablaufen. Or is it a different scenario? Is it a different setup? This is always that question that we come back to again and again and again. So that's where we're at. Let's go ahead and switch over to the GoPro. We'll get a little bit wider shot here, and let's work through Seiji's twitching, his jerking, and see what you think. So take us to technique. All right. So Seiji's going to show us his version of Zukin. Okay. Now for this setup, why don't you describe it, Seiji?
So I found some situations, so keep in mind this is based on me reading the text, but also what I've encountered when fencing with some people. That there's some people who, they're not particularly aggressive, nor are they complacent, but they kind of stick out their sword and long points. So if I'm performing with 10, I cut back, and this person knows to expect that. If I try to work around, he'll cover wide, and he knows it's coming. But at the same time, if I go back, they may not particularly chase immediately. You have to play around with it. But I found that in these situations, as you go back, they're waiting for your response. So they haven't even turned to the other side yet. So in these situations, you take advantage of the time that you come back, keeping your sword in front, and immediately go on with the long edge, and then as Meyer said, you come back with the short edge with the shield house towards the temple. So it's really essential for this. So the technical aspect is that it's really essential that you have a quick cut in, and then immediately a powerful shield house. So if your shield house is not up to par, and mine isn't by any stretch of imagination, that you practice that as well. But the tactic is that your opponent is in long point, they're presenting the blade not only as a threat, but in this case, because they just present it as a weakness, and then you capitalize it by taking a moment, pulling it back. You're deceiving your opponent by making them think, or rather, they already are thinking that you're going to cut around, and they're just waiting for you to cut around, but you instead come into the same opening unexpectedly with a shield howl towards the opposite shoulder, clearing out their blade, and either ending with a cut to the temple or setting it for a thrust. So.
Yeah, and so it's a technique that at the end of the day we have to answer a lot of questions for. You know, one, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to twitch, jerk, or pull? Because that makes quite a bit of difference. And then what's the setup? If we don't have those things, it's really hard to be happy with our interpretation, which is kind of where we're at, and we're sharing that with you today, right? Like it's the process of going through and re-examining this kind of material. For myself, one of the things I've been playing around with this last week after thinking about it, and I will fully admit right now that this is in a conceptual stage of the technique, is using the Zukin rather against someone that maybe is a little more conservative like Seiji. They're keeping a better bind, they're threatening the face a little bit more with their parry, but you also know that they are going to be inclined to want to chase that opening.
Or like hang back.
Yeah, right. They're gonna potentially chase an opening. Now, you're not going to use this against somebody that's really on there, but someone that you've seen will, you know, kind of try and do a riposte against your actions after they've parried, if they feel you leaving the bind, right? And so kind of the setup for there then that I'm looking at is if Seiji attacks, or I attack Seiji, right? Bam, we come in, and he's still threatening. If I start to, I would normally not pull out of this bind, right? This is threatening my face. But if I start to pull out, Seiji's gonna want to chase to that opening, and as soon as he does, I'm right back in there. So kind of the idea on this one is trying to get him to extend long, pull the attack that I want, and then take advantage of it with a shield house. Totally playing around with this one.
And we were thinking that if it's a kind of an opponent that would immediately chase in, you're going to get stabbed in the face.
Yeah.
So it's important that for both of our interpretations so far, it's an opponent who, as you leave the bind, will give you, you know, using an Italian term, a tempo, some time, right? They're not the kind of person who will perform chasing.
Right, yeah, they're not immediately on it with a knock rise and you're going to get wrecked. But someone that's still, you know, being maybe a little bit hesitant and is exposing them to this. Again, not set on this idea. It's you know, we've gone from being happy with our interpretation, which was essentially the Sword Carolina version. I strike in, I pull back to threaten a strike around. As soon as he responds, I'm right back in there with my shield how, which is very similar, you know, that basic pulling back of the action. Kind of coming away with it. You know, Thomas, whether or not, you know, we agree with his technique, and we'll go through why we maybe don't agree with Thomas's here in just a second. It got us thinking more than anything else, which is always great and is really important on this kind of thing. So let's actually talk about Thomas's version. Thomas, when I first watched your video, I loved it. I was like, oh, that's cool. But then we started playing around with it. We started to run into some problems with it. So, you know, kind of going through again, Thomas's pulling is pulling back to basically threaten a strike to the other side. I like that motion. But the part that I'm having difficulty with, and Thomas, maybe you're going to come back and give us some more on this, is after the initial strike, when I pull back, if he goes to parry, and I come back in, it feels like a really weak strike. Now, it's a great thrust. I can stab him through the eye, no problem from there. But, you know, I've already twisted my body away, and I don't have the core to come back in on that angle and land it as an actual strike. And again, this might be us, you know, not fully understanding your technique and working with it some, but it is an issue for us that we're finding it really difficult to land an effective strike from that position. And while I absolutely am an advocate of thrusting in Meyer, the strike still needs to be effective, in my opinion, in there.
It needs to perhaps be able to cut with the short edge and thrust.
Right. And then you had a concern regarding being... Scott did, yeah. Being open, one of our other instructors.
Actually, no, Scott had the concern about the blade contact, if it was that much friction.
Right. That was the other issue, was we were talking about it in terms with sharps. If we've struck in with sharps, and I go to pull from here, if I'm still in that bind, as I pull, it's not going to slide. I'm going to be yanking Seiji's technique. Now, again,
he can't go flat, but you know, we just don't know.
With a twitch or a jerk, you know, this kind of gets into issues of whether or not that's effective. So we're going to keep playing around with your idea, Thomas. You know, we haven't completely discounted it. I still think it has value. Personally, I think it's basically a form of Ablaufen. At that point, it feels kind of like a running off, you know, where the pull at that point ends and an Ablaufen begins. I'm not really sure. But that might be an argument in its favor that you know, as Meyer says, that the Zuken will lead to the Ablaufen. That could be it. So, you know, kind of a messy can of worms this week as we go along with it. Really, I guess what I'm saying at the end of the day, guys, is if you have ideas, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have your own take on Zuken, we would love to hear it on this one. We're fully open to additional ideas, whether it's, you know, a quick twitch, whether it's a pull, whether it's some kind of jerking action or other mechanic that's coming into play there. Absolutely, you know, let us know in the comments or shoot us a question before we end today, and you know, let's talk about it. I'd love to see people's interpretation on it, because I'm up in the air on it at this point again. Just, you know, such a simple thing, but that's the beauty of HEMA, right? Like, right when we think that we know what we're doing and we're happy with our technique, it comes around.
If you want us to do our interpretations from different angles, or again, please comment.
Yeah,
we'd be happy to. I know we only like did it once or
right.
twice.
Well, let's do yours again. We'll do it over the shoulder, because I think Seiji's in particular is nice when seen. Right. So we strike in, and then yeah, he's just coming right back in. Now, maybe it's a doubling, but he's not crossing the hand, right? So yeah. So one more time. Strike. He comes to threaten, and I start to go or not, and he's right back in there. You know, it strikes it right back in. Do we have a comment?
Well, we have from Robert Rutherford saying that he interprets the pulling as really an action just to leave the bind.
Okay.
In the situation, and that he was commenting on the other conversations going on about the applications for you know, changing food as well.
Right.
So it's pulling similar to the changing food.
Right. It going over the top. And again, that's kind of the take from Sword Carolina, is that Dirtwechseln's going to go underneath. Zuken is a way to go over the top of the sword. I will say to a certain extent that, you know, I think that lines up well with Meyer. He does talk about changing, that there are two ways to go under and over. So that could be an argument in his favor as well. And another comment.
This is one from George Coffey. I want to know, why would they have so many versions of leaving the bind, or would you mean that the Zuken is likely a category which contains stuff like drip stones?
So I think I kind of just answered that. I think, you know, the ways of leaving the bind are varied because there are often different intents from one to another. In this case, I don't think that it's a full category, but I do think, as was noted, that it is related to the Dirtwechsel. It is a tactical consideration on how you want to proceed that will be based on exactly where the opponent is, and so that's potentially, you know, one for it. I think is probably it. Any comments?
Yeah, we were just reading Meyer's verses, and we're not going to touch on it fully, but we were reading the part where Meyer mentions, I forgot the verse, but he says, use pulling and deceit to let your cuts fly to off-road targets. And he has some commentary, so we'll also be looking at that as well. So
yeah, so we're going to come back on this, and we're going to play around with it. You know, it's a fun debate for us, and I hope you guys, you know, are enjoying that as well. But that's always the question and the beautiful thing about HEMA, right? I am still really inclined to think that it is basically pulling back, and either if you're going to come back in with another attack, if you're going to switch to the other side, I think it's still there myself.
Keep in mind, at least for Ted and our interpretations, it's based on, in Meyer's longsword section, the first part where he's introducing like techniques. So it's a specific play. So at least for me, what I just did was more of a specific instance of Zuken. So we're curious about the conceptual, the broader picture of what is Zuken in a larger sense, as opposed to one stroke.
Yeah, this does get into the problem also, right? We talk about Zuken as a deceit, but that's separate from it as a mechanical action, which happens sometimes, and is frustrating, I think, for German material, because the shape of the motion is the same, that it really doesn't matter. You know, they call it the same thing, right? I've commented in the past that a Schielhau, you know, is a Schielhau whether used in the vor or the knock, and an outside observer will look at those two things and go, well, those are different techniques in many situations, but because they look and feel basically the same to the person performing them, they get the same name. This might be a situation of that as well. So we're kind of looking at both the motion of the Zuken, right, whether mechanically it's to pull back or Thomas's more almost semi-Ablaufen. and then, you know, the exact tactical scenario to pull off Meyer's deceitful version that he uses. But we're going to move on because we're getting a little short on time today. I want to answer a question from last week, so let's go to questions and answers. I think we're back on this one. Last week on our circle video, and I wanted to come back and talk on that. Matthew was asking us the relationship that we see between the circle and Ablaufen, you know, if we view them kind of the same way that I view the relationship between the reversing of the Verkehrer and the Ausreißen. Matthew, for your question specifically, I think the relationship is kind of there. I just, the way you define it, Ablaufen is the physical action that is done with the sword, whereas the circle is the thing that is done to the person, right? I kind of see Ablaufen as being a running off, circling motion that can happen with or without the presence of a bind. It really doesn't matter. I can do an Ablaufen by myself. When I'm cutting in the air, I can Ablaufen. But I can't really circle without a person, right? If I don't have a target to hit, then Ablaufen doesn't, you know, or the circle doesn't really mean very much. At that point, it kind of looks like I'm doing a Krumpau or a Schielhau, depending on which side that I'm doing it from.
So you're saying maybe the circle was more of a technique, a tactic, whereas Ablaufen is the motion itself. Is that what you're saying?
Sure. Yeah, Ablaufen can be the physical motion of the running off, whereas the circle is a specific application. Right? Whereas then Ablaufen can be failing, right? I can throw my attack in, and before it ever, you know, connects with the opponent's sword, I fail it immediately, Ablaufen, and strike around. And so that kind of gets us into that particular situation. So, Matthew, I hope that answered your question. Thank you always, you know, for additional questions. Do we have any other questions?
I'm not seeing anything as far as a question, no.
Okay, well, in that case, guys, since we are reaching the end of our time here and I am starting to see students arrive, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. And as always, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. We do appreciate it. And then we'll see you next week for another HEMAchat.
Take care.